All right, so today we are going to do a deep dive into the life of Edward J. Adams,
Okay.
a notorious figure from the early 20th century.
Okay.
He was just this whirlwind of charisma and
Yeah.
crime, and his story, I think, really captures
Hmm.
the turbulent times he lived in.
Yeah.
We've got some excerpts from his Wikipedia article ready to
Yeah.
unpack his chaotic journey.
Absolutely. I think what makes Adams so fascinating
Yeah.
is how his life just mirrors all the
Mhm.
societal shifts that were happening around him at the time.
Right.
Prohibition,
Hmm.
the aftermath of World War I.
Right.
It all plays a role
It's all there.
in his story.
Yeah, so let's rewind for a moment.
Okay.
Who was Edward J. Adams before he became infamous?
Well, he was born William Joseph Wallace in 1887 in Kansas.
Oh, wow.
And even from a young age, it seems that he resisted the path that was laid out for him.
Really?
Farm life, and his stepfather didn't really appeal to him. So he
Interesting.
learned to be a barber instead.
Interesting. And that choice eventually takes him to Wichita,
Yep.
a city booming with both opportunity
Yes.
and, as I recall, a fair share of lawlessness.
Precisely. And for someone like Adams who already had a rebellious streak,
Yeah.
Wichita became a breeding ground for his criminal tendencies.
So he falls in with the wrong crowd?
He does. He meets John Callahan,
Okay.
and together they dive headfirst into bootlegging,
Wow.
robberies,
Uh-huh.
and even car theft.
But there's something more to Adams than just a common thug, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The sources describe him as charismatic, handsome,
Yeah.
even a bit of a ladies' man.
Oh, wow.
He had this magnetic personality that drew people to him,
Really?
both men and women.
That makes you wonder how much of his success, if you can call it that,
Right.
was due to sheer charm and personality.
Mm.
Do you think he could have achieved the same notoriety without that charisma?
It's a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Certainly his charm helped him build a gang,
Right.
attract followers, and evade the law for as long as he did.
Yeah.
He seemed to have a real knack for manipulation and
Mm.
persuasion.
And yet it seems his charm had its limits.
Yeah.
His wife, tired of the constant threat of his criminal life,
Yeah.
and his infidelity eventually left him.
Yes, it seems even Adams's charm couldn't smooth over the consequences of his actions.
Yeah.
At least not in his personal life.
No, not at all. Okay, so we've got this complex character
Yeah.
operating in a time of major social upheaval.
Yeah.
What were some of his early crimes?
Well,
How did he go from petty thief to notorious bandit?
as we mentioned, it started with those early crimes alongside Callahan.
Right.
But Adams was ambitious,
Mm-hmm.
and he soon formed his own gang.
Okay.
By the early days of Prohibition, his name was synonymous with banditry throughout the Midwest.
Wow.
It's a remarkably fast rise to infamy.
It makes you wonder if the environment back then, with the rise of organized crime during Prohibition, almost accelerated his criminal career. Do you think someone like Adams would have the same opportunity to rise so quickly
Yeah.
in a different era?
It's certainly possible that the social context played a significant role.
Yeah.
Prohibition created a vacuum
Right.
that figures like Adams were all too eager to fill.
So we're talking full-blown gangster territory now.
Yeah.
Was there a specific incident that marked his escalation from petty crime to something more serious?
The attempted robbery of Harry Trustell's gambling den in Kansas City in 1920
Okay.
was a major turning point for Adams.
Yeah.
It was a brazen move,
Yeah.
a daylight robbery of a well-known establishment, and it was orchestrated with the notorious Majors brothers.
And that's where the story really takes a dramatic turn, right?
Yeah.
What were the consequences of this attempted robbery?
It resulted in a shootout,
Oh, no.
chaos, and ultimately the death of Frank Gardner, one of the gamblers present.
Oh, my gosh.
The gang was captured, except for Dudley Majors,
Right.
who managed to escape only to be caught later and imprisoned in Delaware.
So the rest of the gang is apprehended?
Mhm.
What happens to them?
Well, for Ray and Walter Majors,
Yeah.
it was the end of the line.
Yeah.
They both ended up serving time and ultimately died in prison.
Wow.
But for Adams, this was just the beginning of his truly wild ride.
Hold on. He doesn't go to prison.
Well, he was sentenced,
Oh.
but while being transported to prison,
Right.
he pulled off a daring escape.
How?
He jumped off a moving train.
You jumped off a moving train. Was this a common occurrence back then, or was this something truly audacious?
Crane escapes weren't unheard of,
Right.
but the sheer boldness of Adams' escape along with the fact that he did it while already facing serious charges,
Right.
made it sensational news.
Wow.
It captured the public imagination,
Hmm.
and it really cemented his reputation as a cunning and daring outlaw.
So he escapes and
Just a few days later, he
what?
teams up with Julius Finney
Okay.
and robs a bank in Cullison, Kansas.
Wait, so he escapes and immediately goes back to robbing. This guy was something else.
It's a remarkable display of audacity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Almost like he was taunting the authorities,
Yeah.
flaunting his ability to outsmart them.
Yeah.
And it raises the question, what drove him?
Yeah.
Was it simply greed,
Right.
or was there something more at play?
And he doesn't get away with it this time, right?
No. He is apprehended shortly after the Cullison robbery
Okay.
near Garden Plain after a car crash.
Okay, before you tell me he escapes again, remind me, what were the stakes this time around? What kind of sentence was he facing?
This time it was serious.
Okay.
For the Cullison bank robbery,
Right.
he was convicted and given a sentence of 10 to 30 years
Wow.
on top of the life sentence he had waiting for him in Missouri
Oh my God.
for the murder during the Kansas City incident.
So essentially a double life sentence. You'd think that would be enough to keep anyone behind bars, but not Edward J. Adams.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The Kansas State Penitentiary wouldn't hold him for long either.
Okay, this Houdini of outlaws. How does he pull off escape number 2?
It was August of 1921.
Okay.
Just a few months after his capture,
Mm-hmm.
he sabotages the prison power plant,
What?
plunging the building into darkness and chaos.
Oh, wow.
And he scales the prison walls with 3 other inmates, Frank Foster, George Weisberger, and D.C. Brown.
Wow. A coordinated escape with accomplices. This is getting more elaborate. Did they all make it out?
One of his accomplices, D.C. Brown, was recaptured just days later.
Okay.
But the rest, including Foster and Weisberger,
Okay.
managed to stay free and would join Adams in his continued escapades.
Wow.
They even had a getaway driver waiting for them, Billy Fennelman,
Really?
a World War I veteran
Oh, wow.
who had unfortunately turned to a life of crime.
So it sounds like he's building quite the crew now. What does this new and improved Adams gang get up to?
Their next move would shock Kansas
Okay.
and set the stage for a truly deadly chase.
Oh.
But I think it's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
All right, folks. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a flash to continue this wild ride through the life and crimes of Edward J. Adams. Welcome back. We left off with Edward J. Adams fresh out of prison.
Yeah.
And assembling a crew.
Right.
The sources paint a picture of a man who seemed almost invincible.
It's true. Each daring escape,
Yeah.
each successful robbery
Mm-hmm.
seemed to fuel his legend and audacity.
Right.
And this next chapter is a stark reminder of the escalating stakes
Yeah.
and the real-world consequences of his actions.
You mentioned their next move would shock Kansas. Set the scene for us.
Okay.
What happened?
Well, just weeks after their escape,
Okay.
the gang robbed banks in Rose Hill and Hayesville, Kansas,
Okay.
making off with around $10,000.
Okay.
But it wasn't the amount that shocked people, it was the violence
Right.
that accompanied it.
The sources mention an incident during the Hayesville robbery.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
During that robbery, Adams encountered an 82-year-old man named James Creeville.
Oh, wow.
And for reasons that remain unclear,
Yeah.
Adams pistol-whipped the elderly man, fracturing his skull.
Oh, my goodness.
Creeville tragically died from his injuries.
That's horrifying. It seems like a completely unnecessary act of brutality.
Right.
What does this tell us about Adams?
It's a chilling turn in his story.
Yeah.
Up until this point, he was seen as this daring, almost romantic figure.
Yeah.
A Robin Hood of sorts, even if he was keeping the loot for himself.
Right.
But this incident shattered that image.
Yeah.
It revealed a capacity for cold-blooded violence
Right.
that shocked even those who have followed his exploits with a sense of morbid fascination.
It makes you wonder if this marked a shift in public perception. Did people start to turn against him after this?
I think so. The newspapers, which had previously covered his escapes with a mix of admiration and amusement,
Mm-hmm.
now condemned his actions in no uncertain terms.
Wow.
He was no longer the charming rogue.
Wow.
He was a dangerous criminal,
Yeah.
a menace to society.
And how did this incident change the authorities' approach to capturing Adams? Did it escalate the manhunt?
Absolutely. The gloves were off. Law enforcement saw him as a serious threat, and they were determined to bring him to justice no matter the cost.
Right.
What follows is a series of increasingly violent encounters
Yeah.
between Adams and the police,
Okay.
a deadly game of cat and mouse that would span several states and claim more innocent lives.
Let's talk about these encounters. Where did things start to unravel for Adams and his gang?
The first major confrontation came in October of 1921,
Okay.
just a month after the Hayesville robbery.
Mm-hmm.
The police attempted to trap the gang near Untold, Kansas,
Okay.
but Adams, ever the cunning strategist,
Yeah.
anticipated their move.
Yeah.
A shootout ensued,
Oh,
and
no.
Deputy Benjamin Fisher was wounded.
So they managed to escape again, but this time an officer is injured. It seems the stakes are getting higher with each encounter.
They are. And Adams' actions become even more brazen. 11 days later, they rob a bank near Osceola, Iowa.
Wow.
A posse is formed,
Okay.
and they nearly catch the gang south of Murray, Iowa.
Hmm.
Another shootout breaks out. Oh, geez. This one leaving several members of the posse seriously injured.
It's a miracle no one was killed in these shootouts.
Yeah.
But tragically, the violence didn't end there.
You're right. During that same encounter near Murray, Iowa,
Okay.
a farmer named Charles William Jones witnessed the unfolding events
Mm-hmm.
and tried to help the posse apprehend the gang.
Oh, wow.
Adams, without hesitation, fatally shot Jones.
It's a sobering reminder that these weren't just games. Real people, innocent bystanders,
Right.
were getting caught in the crossfire.
It's a dark chapter in Adams' story.
Yeah.
And sadly, it wouldn't be the last innocent life lost in his desperate bid to stay ahead of the law.
The sources also mention an incident involving Patrolman A.L. Young back in Wichita. Can you tell us about that?
This occurred just days after the Iowa robbery and the death of Charles William Jones.
Okay.
Adams was back in Wichita,
Mm-hmm.
and while Officer Young was on duty,
Okay.
Adams shot and killed him.
What was the motive behind that?
It's believed that Adams was driven by revenge. He may have held a grudge against Officer Young, possibly believing that Young had wronged him in some way
Okay.
during a previous encounter.
So not only is he robbing banks and escaping custody,
Right.
he's now assassinating law enforcement officers.
Right.
This goes far beyond typical outlaw behavior.
Right. It's a blatant disregard for the law and for human life.
Yeah.
It's a turning point that cements his position as public enemy number one.
Right.
The manhunt intensifies.
Yeah.
Rewards are offered.
Uh-huh.
Adams and his gang are the most wanted criminals in the Midwest.
With the heat on, did they try to lay low after this? Did they try to disappear?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Eh.
But incredibly,
Yeah.
just 2 days after the murder of Officer Young,
Yeah.
Adams and his gang pull off their most daring heist yet. They rob a Santa Fe Express train near Ottawa, Kansas,
Oh, wow.
netting them $35,000.
Wow, that's a huge score. You have to wonder what was going through their minds at that point. Were they feeling invincible? Or were they just desperate?
It's hard to say. Perhaps it was a combination of both.
Yeah.
The success of this robbery seems to embolden Adams,
Uh-huh.
and yet it also marks the beginning of his downfall.
Okay.
His actions become increasingly reckless,
Right.
almost as if he's courting disaster.
What happens next? Does this robbery finally lead to their capture?
Not immediately.
Okay.
They manage to escape with the loot.
Okay.
But the very next day,
Mm-hmm.
Adams is back in Wichita,
He goes back to Wichita.
and his actions suggest a man on the edge,
Right.
a man who knows his time is running out.
Okay. Paint the picture for us.
Oh.
What happens in Wichita?
On the evening of November 20th,
Okay.
just 2 days after the train robbery,
Yeah.
Adams is joyriding around Wichita
Whoa.
with Frank Foster,
Mm-hmm.
Nellie Miles, a local madam who is a longtime friend of his,
Oh, wow.
George McFarland, a local thug and bootlegger,
Okay.
and 2 alleged prostitutes.
Well, even with the police on high alert,
Right.
he's cruising around town, almost flaunting his freedom.
It was a reckless move,
Yeah.
and it would prove to be his undoing. They were driving erratically,
Okay.
and they were eventually pulled over by 2 motorcycle policemen.
Oh, that can't be good. What happened next?
A shot rang out from inside Adams's car.
Oh, no.
It's unclear whether it was Adams or Foster who fired the shot,
Right.
but it fatally wounded one of the officers,
Oh, my gosh.
Robert Fitzpatrick.
Another officer down off.
Right.
And what about Adams? Does he escape again?
He does,
Wow.
but this time he's truly on the run.
Right.
He and Foster ditch the women and the car
Okay.
and flee south into Cowley County.
Okay.
Later that night, their car runs out of gas,
Oh, no.
and they attempt to steal another vehicle from a nearby farm.
Oh, jeez.
But the farmer, George Oldham, resists,
Right.
and Adams, in a cold-blooded act that mirrored the fate of James Creeville,
Yeah.
shoots and kills him.
This is just senseless violence now. It seems like every encounter ends in tragedy.
Yeah.
What happens after the murder of George Oldham?
Adams and Foster managed to steal Oldham's car
Okay.
and return to Wichita.
Okay.
But their escape is short-lived.
Right,
The
yeah.
Nets is closing in,
Uh-huh.
and Adams' final stand is just around the corner.
Okay.
But I think we need to pause here for now
Yeah.
and pick up the story in part 3 of our deep dive.
All right, folks, we'll be back in a moment to recount the dramatic conclusion to the saga of Edward J. Adams.
So we're back, and the tension is palpable. Edward J. Adams is on the run, having left a trail of tragedy and chaos in his wake. What happens next?
Well, despite the escalating violence and the intense manhunt, Adams returned to Wichita.
He went back.
He and Foster sought out George McFarland, who had disappeared during that encounter with Oldham.
Oh, right.
It's a strange detail, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even amidst this chaos, there's this element of loyalty or perhaps desperation
Right.
that keeps them tethered to their associates.
Yeah, it's almost like they were clinging to any sense of normalcy to the familiar faces of their criminal underworld,
Right.
even as their world was crumbling around them. So what happens when they find McFarland? Well, they locate him at his house. But 2 police officers are already there.
Oh.
A confrontation ensues,
Uh-oh.
and Adams shoots and wounds Officer Ray Kastner.
Oh, wow.
The other officer manages to hide, and incredibly, Adams escapes yet again.
It's astonishing how many times this man evaded capture. He's like a phantom slipping through the grasp of the law time and again.
Yep.
But you mentioned this was the beginning of his downfall. What happens to finally bring him down?
Realizing the heat was too intense, Adams decided to lay low until after Officer Fitzpatrick's funeral,
Oh, wow.
assuming there would be fewer police around town.
That's a chilling calculation.
It's a testament to his cold-blooded pragmatism.
Yeah, it's almost as if he was treating this entire ordeal as a strategic game rather than a series of life or death situations. So what was his plan to get out of Wichita?
He went to rent a car,
Okay,
hoping to simply drive out of town unnoticed.
right.
But the proprietor of the car rental place recognized him
Oh, no.
and immediately alerted the police.
What a stroke of bad luck. You can almost feel the walls closing in at this point.
It's the end of the line for Edward J. Adams.
Wow.
3 officers arrived at the rental place.
Okay.
Adams, true to form, opened fire, hitting 2 of them.
Oh, gosh.
Detective Charles Hoffman was fatally wounded, and Officer Charles Bowman was also hit.
Even in his final moments, he chose violence resistance. It's tragic,
Yeah,
but it's also a consistent thread throughout his story, wouldn't you say?
absolutely. It speaks
Okay.
to his character, his refusal to submit, his belief perhaps that he could always outsmart, outmaneuver, or outgun his adversary.
Right.
But this time his luck had run out.
Yeah.
One of the officers, D.C. Stuckey, returned fire and shot Adams 3 times, killing him.
What a dramatic end to a truly tumultuous life. How did Wichita react to Adams's death? Was there a sense of relief? Justice served?
There was a sense of closure, certainly,
Yeah.
but there was also a profound sense of loss.
Oh.
5 people were dead, 3 law enforcement officers,
Right.
an innocent farmer,
Yeah.
and an elderly man caught in the crossfire. Yeah, it's just awful.
Adams's reign of terror had left a deep scar on the community.
And yet, despite the devastation, there was also that public display of his body wasn't there.
Yeah.
Thousands of people flocked to see the slain outlaw. What do you make of that?
It speaks to the complex and often contradictory nature of public perception.
Yeah.
Here was a man who had terrorized the city,
Right.
and yet in death, he became a spectacle, a source of morbid fascination.
Yeah.
Perhaps it was a way for people to confront their fears, to try and understand the forces that had unleashed such chaos upon their community.
And what about Adams's gang? What happened to his associates after his death?
In the aftermath, there was a crackdown. 18 people were arrested as accomplices and hangers-on,
Wow.
including Frank Foster, who was sentenced to life in prison.
Wow. With Adams gone, his gang was effectively dismantled, bringing an end to a violent chapter in Wichita's history. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from his humble beginnings as a barber.
To his reign of terror as the Midwest's most notorious outlaw, Edward J. Adams's life was a whirlwind of daring escapes, brazen robberies, and ultimately senseless violence. But it's more than just a crime story, isn't it? What are the broader takeaways here?
I think Adams's story reminds us that even the most sensational headlines are rooted in human stories,
Yeah.
shaped by complex forces beyond the individual.
Right.
His life unfolded against the backdrop of Prohibition, a time of social upheaval, economic uncertainty, and shifting moral boundaries.
Right, it's a crazy time.
These factors created fertile ground for figures like Adams to rise to prominence,
Yeah.
however tragically.
So he was both a product of his time and an outlier, a man who pushed the boundaries of acceptable behavior to their limits.
Yeah.
And his story, even now, nearly a century later, continues to fascinate us. Why do you think that is?
Perhaps it's the inherent human fascination with those who live outside the rules,
Mm.
who challenge authority, who
Yeah.
embody a sense of daring and freedom,
Mhm.
however misguided. Adam's story is a cautionary tale, certainly a reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition and disregard for human life.
Right.
But it's also a story that forces us to examine the societal conditions that give rise to such figures,
Right.
the forces that shape our perceptions of right and wrong,
Yeah.
of heroes and villains.
Edward J. Adams, outlaw, escape artist, murderer. His life was a whirlwind, and his legacy continues to spark debate and reflection. As we conclude our deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. How does history remember those who live on the fringes of society? Are they merely criminals, or are they something more? And how do our own values and perspectives shape our interpretations of their actions?
Until next time, keep diving deep.